Greetings, everyone. This is Virtuous Roots, where we reclaim virtue to bring it to our home and yours. And I'm Thomas McCuddy.
I'm Thomas Quackenbush.
And I'm Stacey McCuddy.
So, obviously, we have a very different episode today. Nick is not able to join us. So, Stacy, my lovely bride, has joined us for the podcast. And this is her first time joining us. The topic for today, though, is something that, again, this comes out of Stacy and I having these conversations many
Mm,
times, the idea of parenting and sanctification. That when, as parents, part of parenting is us growing in our sanctification instead of looking at it as, I think the way the culture shows it is, I'm just so beat down and my life is so much worse. We have a growing trend
mhm.
with the dinks, dual income, no kids. So that's a thing in the States. And so we want to approach this idea. And so, Stacy, since you're joining us, I know that you and I have had this conversation, but where does this kind of stem from? What are some of your thoughts with parenting and how that relates with our sanctification?
I think it's been the biggest eye-opening, maybe like mind-opening, heart-opening experience for me becoming a parent
Mm,
because I considered myself a pretty good person before I had kids. And, there just weren't any, real strong challenges in my life to bring forth those vices that I didn't know I had.
mhm.
And once you have kids, that, like I said, you have new feelings, new emotions, new scenarios. You have nonstop expectations on you, 24/7. There's never, a break.
Mm,
And so, like I said, a lot of things surfaced once I became a mom that I didn't know were there. So
Mm,
that's how I consider parenting as a sanctifying process because it brings those issues to light because you're under pressure or whatever on a regular basis, and when you're squeezed, those things come out that maybe you didn't know were there.
mhm,
And so, like you said, then you can kind of make that choice of, okay, I'm just going to that's just who I am and that's just how I'm going to react to my kids, and you can fall into a habit of vicious behavior,
mhm.
or you can choose to take that as a sanctifying process and say, okay, these are things that I need to deal with, I need to grow in. And then in turn, you can teach your children those virtues because you've learned how to have them yourself.
mhm.
I
Was
I
that your experience?
Yeah, absolutely, and I think of when you're as you're talking, like, they sanctify you before you
Mhm.
sanctify them.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I think about that all the time. I mean, first, I think marriage brings
Hmm.
that's like the first you get married, and that's your first now you have somebody else because you have that period of time when you're first dating and, maybe the first year or so of the honeymoon phase, and, like, nothing your partner does is wrong, and, like, everything, just they're perfect and all this, and then you get a few years into marriage, and you start realizing that, those things aren't as cute as they once were, and love has to develop, and you actually have to work on it. And I think for me, in being married and actually we face each other like we didn't know what we're getting ourselves into, and, like, why is this hard? And then, that's the first because now I'm reflecting back on myself and I'm starting to really think about that. And then when we have kids, it's that's just kind of multiplies that feeling. And you're constantly you don't know the future. You don't know, like, you have your children, you have some expectations for them, but it's still, you don't know what's gonna happen. And so you have to, it puts you in that place, and I think for me, have faith, strengthens my faith in Christ because I need him. I realize that I can't do this by myself. I can't think, it's just impossible that way. So
Mm.
I think sanctifying, they sanctify me daily.
I think it's worth mentioning as we're doing this that we don't want to give the impression like, oh, when you become a parent, everything's bad. But nobody sits and thinks, nobody ever asks me, hey, how do I get through all these good times as a parent? How do I get through all this, all this great stuff? Like we never, that's easy.
Yeah.
But with the parenting comes these challenges where a lot of people almost feel and maybe think, well, what am I doing wrong? Am I being
Yeah.
punished? I think that was a favorite line of mine, like when things were just always kind of going wrong, like, okay, so I'm being punished. Something's happening that, I'm going through all this.
I think that is a natural tendency to take that viewpoint of, okay, what did I do wrong? Obviously, since I'm the parent, they're the children. If they're not meeting your
Yeah.
expectations, then it must be something that you didn't do correctly. But I think we have to remember, and I think it was a hard lesson for me, is that, you don't take personal offense when your children don't meet those
Yeah.
expectations or when they misbehave. And you have to have that mindset that they are sinners just like you,
Yeah.
and they're independent souls with their own independent free will. And as much as you want to try and control things and manipulate the outcomes, ultimately they can choose,
Yeah. It's still
to
they're
go
still
against
free to
you
choose whatever.
every single time.
Mhm.
And I think that's again where you have to separate their behavior from your worth as a parent or even as
Exactly.
just a person.
Well, and also with the whole parenting is just, like, because you're thinking in yourself, and because I'm always looking back. I'm like, well, what was I like at this age, and what kind of things was I going through? And a lot of times I'm like, well, my kids seem to be better than I was, at least, and not as sinister and manipulative or something that when I was that age. But I'm also when it comes to discipline, we've talked about this quite a bit on the show. A lot of times, are we disciplining out of frustration, like,
Mhm.
just because they're annoying, or we're in bad mood, or we didn't eat, or we didn't get enough sleep, or whatever, or are we actually discipline them because they're not doing what's right? And that's another thing, because we could easily just constantly get on our kids because they're being annoying. And sometimes, like, you guys have boys, I have two boys and a girl who's probably louder than all of them at times. And there's times where and she's very clingy. She wants to be on, she likes to be like with me. She wants to climb on me, all those things. She wants me to throw her around. She likes doing gymnastics. And there's days where you just like, I can't, like, I'm so tired or whatever. And like, do I get mad at her for wanting to spend time with me? It's like this thing that goes on in my head. I'm like, well, how can she wants to spend time with me. This is, we don't have, she's only gonna be this age for a little while, and so those things, I think that part of that process of sanctification is recognizing that time is precious,
Mm.
and that you have this time, and, like, you get to choose, like, how you react to your kids, how to discipline them properly and not act from your emotions. And we get into like temperance and other issues that we
So let's take this to a fun place.
okay.
So, because this is again Stacy's first time, so let's throw some curveballs. We talked about how, and I'll go first. I'll go first with this. That when we have children, and I think this is different than when you first get married, because again, you're learning how to live with somebody, but you can usually reason with that person to some degree.
And you
So
chose that
Yeah.
person.
you chose that person. So when God blesses you with a child, and you have this little bundle of unreasonable joy, and you can't reason with them until they become a certain age, like they're
Mhm.
just not able to understand. And so in some ways you're like, okay, I know they don't understand, but there's no getting away from it. And then all of a sudden these new vices that maybe you didn't know you had begin to surface.
Mhm.
So for me, when we first had children, just my frustration, like I just had this anger that would well
Mhm.
up, and I didn't realize. I mean, I think sometimes this would happen with me, but it would just happen so much more. Like when I had children, I realized, I never thought of myself as having an anger problem,
Mhm.
but I realized, no, I kind of have an anger problem. Like I just get so frustrated, or I learned my limits, and then what happens when I go past those limits. So what about you guys? We'll start over here with Stacy. What is something you learned that maybe all of a sudden, because I think like you said, we think of ourselves, we're pretty good people. We can, I was a youth pastor. I dealt with so much. Oh, I deal with kids all the time, and then I get my own, and I'm like, I'm not as good as I thought I was. What's something that you learned about yourself when you after we had our first children?
I think anger was definitely the biggest one for me as well. I didn't consider myself an angry person at all, really, before having children. I think for me, and it's not probably what this podcast is about, but for me, any sort of fears or anxieties like manifest themselves as anger. And I think because we care so much about our children and we care so much about the discipleship process and we care so much about making them virtuous humans, we can parent from that place of fear. And then
Yeah.
when you have those fears, those frustrations come out as anger when, the child may not actually be doing anything wrong. It's just, again, you're not getting the
Yeah.
outcomes that you wanted to get, and you have that fear of, if you're messing them up, or they're gonna turn out the way that you want them to, or they're gonna choose to have a relationship with God when they get older, and there's so many fears and worries as a parent, and I think that's where a lot of that anger can stem from.
Mhm.
I really like how you like that the way you thought of that too, how your fear manifests in those ways. Like
Mhm.
that's a realization. That's a really big realization because last night we did a Bible study or we're in Genesis with my home group and we talked about Hagar and Abraham and Sarah, like the chapter 16, and just and we the question was asked, it was like, are they acting out of fear or faith?
Mhm.
And then I start building like the scenario with because it's relevant for especially for moms and for women because at that time like your value as a woman was your ability to bear children and was so
Mhm.
important. And Sarah was ashamed, I'm sure, and probably filled with all kinds of anxieties and just frustrations because they never had children. And there's this promise that God has given them, and just the impulsivity of having, just out of that fear, out of that frustration, making a bad choice and then having to live with that, and like, and then we see that all the time. And that, how many times have we like impulsively just out of that fear, just made that choice and kind of overstepped, we didn't put faith into the situation. We just kind of got impulsive because we wanted to take things in our own hands.
Mhm.
And like kind of going into my own, like realization too, like with my kids growing up, for them growing up, is that kind of thing where I'm just like realizing, I got to be patient. If I, especially as a Christian, I'm like, am I going to actually have faith and into the future, not just like kind of worry and have all this anxiety? Am I actually going to trust God and kind of dispel that fear with faith in what God has promised? And for me, I'm different because I'm not like an angry person. So I kind of go into the other direction. So I realize that I'm very passive.
Mm.
And like when I'm encountering something that's really like kind of frustrating, or, I just want to go be by myself.
Mhm.
That's my nature. And I realize I can't do that. And I have to engage. I have to be, just anger is not something that, even though it's like you see it as a problem, but not all the time. Sometimes it's good to get angry at the appropriate times, at the appropriate, and sometimes like that's for me, like, oh, I should be getting a little bit more frustrated with this. I should be jumping up. That's the kind of device that had that was hidden. I didn't realize until I had children.
I think that I suffer from that same thing too. Like I either get angry or I ended up just allowing things to go. And I even have seen this in my own teaching, like when I was teaching with teenagers, that there was more chaos than there should have been. I should have been
Hmm.
more. And we even talked about this, and I'm fine with mentioning my we did a part of our discipleship group. I asked them, to go home and talk to their spouses about what virtue they need to grow in, and I did the same thing. I went home and asked Stacy, and she said, I need to work on the virtue of correction, the justice with my children. That I'm light on that, if I believe. Yes, so getting definite head nods there for those who are listening. So,
Um, I love that you brought up the story of Sarah and Hagar and Thomas because I think that, the way Sarah treated Hagar with bitterness and
Hmm.
resentment, I think we can have those same feelings toward our children. Not obviously not the same
Yeah, but
situation,
that
but those same feelings manifest if we're not allowing parenting to be a sanctifying process.
yeah,
If we're not keeping our mindset right, it's very, very easy to fall into bitterness and resentment
it
towards our children.
and that's it's insane. Like just because it's a because people think that this whole process is just should just manifest just organically, and there should be no work. I should just,
Right.
we have children. I am a dad. Well, you are, like, biologically you have now have sired a child, but growing into the role, it
Mhm.
kind of reminds me a lot of like just being justified. We are justified when Christ saves us, right? And then, then we're declared righteous before the Father. And then there's the process of sanctification that
Mhm.
goes into the rest. So like when we're first Christians, we're brand new born again believers. We're very naive. Like we're so excited and we're like happy, we're just like blown away by this new life and this new perspective of life and seeing, loving God. And then, but you're, when it comes to your knowledge and your experience, everything that's non-existent at the really beginning. And I think the same thing with parenting. You become a father or a mother, and then mothers, I think, have a natural instinct that God has put in them to be protective and care for their children. Because it's phenomenal just seeing the tenacity of women as mothers. Because we want to sleep as guys. We want to we don't want to stay up all night and feed. And, like, and my wife just it was just she hears the baby cry, she gets up and just goes right to work. It just God put that in her.
I don't think necessarily that they want to stay up
Oh
all
no,
night and do these things,
but
but they jump in and
but they just
they
do.
make it happen.
That's a virtue that women have.
Mhm.
It's God instills this type of character in moms, and
But I think to finish off the point that you were trying to make is that, like you said, it's one moment in time, just like your justification, you become a parent. But in the rest of
yeah.
their life, even into their adulthood, you're still growing
Are you
and learning how
yeah?
to be a mom and a
Because
dad.
a lot of people think it's just like the college thing. You get your 4-year degree, and I'm like, I don't need to read another book the rest of my life. In reality, like getting your degree is just a step into a lifetime of just learning and giving you the foundation for that learning.
So
It's
to connect this in with scripture
mm,
with that idea, so going to an interesting place, James chapter 1 verses 2 through 4. James says, "Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete, lacking in nothing." So I like using this verse in relation to what we're talking about, because when James says, when you meet trials of various kinds, a lot of different things are going to happen. And I think this is what sometimes happens when we're parenting, is that, oh, we have why am I having to deal with these things? Like strange things end up happening. And I think that builds some of the frustration. Especially, I think one of our very early things, our son was chewing on the end of the cord of the blind and broke off like a really like nasty looking sharp piece, and pretty sure he ate it. So in that instance, I think I was the freak out parent.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. So I was the one like, we need to go get this checked out. Doctor's like, he'll be okay. Just watch for some things. And but I'm just like, what's gonna happen? Like I'm sitting there like, why did you eat the thing? Like, don't do that. And it's parenting becomes a lot of these kinds of trials.
mm-hmm.
But James is reminding us that these trials, they're meant to grow us, that it will produce its full effect. We will become, as parents, perfect and complete, because we're not. We have to go through these trials. And I think this is the encouragement to parents, that as you face these things, don't look at them as, oh gosh, just another thing. This is what's helping grow us. So, what I want to ask, as we're starting to wrap up, what is it we talked about? Okay, when we first became parents, the vices we found. Now, having been parents now for 14 years,
15 years.
15 years, yes.
Because
So ours is 14.
he's about half a year difference right between.
Yeah, yeah. So basically 14, 15 years of this, decade and a half. How is it that you have grown? What virtue has come out from being a parent and going through these things? How are you better through this, that maybe we can also encourage other parents to look to those things, a way that they'll improve and can grow? I'll go first. So when I think about, with my background, I didn't understand. I didn't have a cohesive family. I didn't have that sense of family bond and unity, and like living sacrificially amongst each other. We were very much self-centered people, like in my family. Like we were, we all got our way. And so when in starting the family, having the kids, part of what God grew in me is that sense of community with the family, that love for other people, the idea of genuinely sacrificing myself. I knew I had vices of kind of playing the martyr, where, oh, fine, I'll be the one to do this, and that vice comes out. And, but learning to cultivate more of that virtue of that self-sacrifice and that virtue of giving of yourself. Those are things God has taught me, and there's really no other way to learn those things other than going through the hard times, other than
Mhm.
learning to deny yourself. This is one of those ways where I think that's the important thing for me is that it wasn't just denying myself. Anyone could deny themselves and do it for the wrong reasons and do it with wrong motivation, but to do it because I love, that's kind of what you're able to learn in a family.
Yep.
So I think that's where my sanctification in many ways grew.
I think for me, it's still a daily process. I mean, you don't arrive ever, but as far as growth, um, I think one important thing is when you do have those moments of anger and you do have those moments of frustration, something I have worked really hard on is being able to go back and apologize to the child that, I was maybe too harsh with or,
Yeah.
treated unfairly and to ask for their forgiveness and to make it right. And that is a really hard thing to do. That is a
It is.
very humbling thing that you have to do. And I think I kind of came from a family where, like, you know, I'm the parent, I'm the child, and there's no like bridge in between,
Yeah.
like there would
Mhm.
never have been an apology, from the parent. Um, but they like I said, that sets such a good example for your child, to show that, okay, I know I messed up. I did something wrong. Mommy or daddy or whoever, is still on the sanctification process. And you're setting that example for them that this Christianity, the Christian life is something you have to work at every day. You have to take up your cross daily
Yep.
and deny yourself and, it's never a moment where you've arrived.
I think I can agree with both of you, like, just because I feel like, I mean, there's gonna be some similarities because we're all on this journey together, as, believers, and we have children. There's gonna be differences in terms of, our different personalities, but, also see, I think for me is if we put a virtue to it, it'd be justice, just
Mhm,
recognizing, and I think prioritizing, like putting up things in a proper order, like, my family, I have God, and then like my wife and my family before like the other things in my life,
mhm,
and make sure that priority's set, and I'm taking care of my wife and my children first, and making sure that and even my own self, like my own selfish things that I want to do, and make sure that everybody's taken care of before, I mean, it's not to say that we can't ever do anything fun, but put those things in a proper place and recognize what I owe my family.
mhm,
Mhm.
And that's something I had to learn over time. And I think, looking back, because you mentioned like growing up, and I think we do that. Like we kind of remember what it was like to be our kids' age and our experience, and you're like, oh wow, this was bad experience for me. I want to do something different when I race. I want to not be like my parents when they did this. And one of the things, my dad worked a lot, um and I didn't see him very often. And so there's like a handful of memories my mom brings up once in a while, like of me and him together, but really didn't have much. And one of the like my ambitions as a dad is I want to like litter my kids' minds with all of these memories of us hanging out,
mhm,
and just like the good and the bad, but dad was there. And that's what like that's became really, really important to me, and just recognizing I want dad to be there. I want to be that, like, them look back on their life. It's not gonna be perfect. I'm not perfect, but at least I was there with them, and spending that time with them and being intentional, and actually, being present with them during those moments.
Mhm. So I think as a word of encouragement to all the parents, and I think even the parents to be that are out there,
Mhm.
this idea is that this is a sanctifying process. It is something that is purposely going to be difficult because you can't cultivate some of these virtues we talk about, like fortitude. You can't cultivate it unless things are difficult.
mhm,
And God is giving you the blessing to cultivate this, not just with your family, but that way, like even in the case of my kids, to become the kind of person I need, that even though I might not be that way in the front end, maybe I can end well and even go into those adult years walk with them in a much better way.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
thank you for the conversation today. You can find our podcast, Virtuous Roots, on all major streaming platforms. Until next time, God bless.